You are welcome to the second episode of the series Consciousness and Personal Fulfillment. In case you're not with us in the first episode, let me restate here that the initial episode posed the question regarding what constitutes who we are as persons or human beings. The entire series is designed to empower you, the individual, gain a grip on your inner life for your mental well-being, as well as facilitate your pursuit of personal fulfillment. This second episode highlights the Patchy psychological notions that underlie modern man's outlook. It is a necessary backdrop to delve into what constitutes consciousness and how it relates to the other features of man's interiority, the body, as well as our physical exertion. Episode 2, Part 1. If we looked at the history of humankind with a clear eye, we possibly wouldn't escape coming to this conclusion. Thus far, man has not attained the definitive sense of self. We do not know what we are as human beings. In effect, man has been in the dark regarding his interiority. Being in the dark regarding what we are, essentially, as I did point out in the previous episode, underlies the contradictions of man's knowledge, and I dare say it is the Achilles heel of civilization. Let's proceed here by straight away highlighting some of the notable contradictions or inconsistencies in how we view who we are as human beings. Early in the 20th century, a cheerful author called Mary Pendant, in the book of Common Joys, her book, remarked that the savage, with his fondness limited to his family or tribe, was content with a rudimentary form of music, which to us today would be no music but mere noise. And however the savage may have been moved by melodious sounds, he reflected no inclination to advancement in the greatest arts. Pendant also observed that unlike the primitive man who seems to have found delight in cruelty, modern man is lucky to be born with a desire for helping and a human instinct to serve. I pray you keep in mind those observations by Pendant, because we shall refer to them later in this episode. Clearly, however, Pendant's optimism regarding modern man was abundant. By the time her book went into print, the First World War, which began in 1914, was well underway. And barely a decade passed after the civilized world had explored ways to avert catastrophes of the kind, and then the Second World War broke out. Now, the planet has since experienced more horrors, with some of them according more visible headlines than others. On that note, let me put it to you that despite the profound cultural, scientific, and technological developments over the epochs, man has essentially remained the same. To stimulate a quick reflection on how far we have come as the human species, I have prepared a simple, light-hearted video. My voice hovers over the video to accord it the necessary focus. After this short video, we shall explore the Patchy psychological notions that evidently underlie modern man's outlook. The aim is to lay the ground that will concentrate our attention to answer what consciousness is. As I have indicated, even with the remarkable cultural, scientific, and technological advancements over the centuries and millennia, man has in essence remained the same. The manners of this primate, man as to way, do not bear out his ardent claims of culture or civilization. Man is a bickering creature with woolly notions regarding what he essentially is. But that scarcely bothers him. After all, he has made notable strides in understanding his environment and is usually jocular towards his fellows. This Homo sapient, bearing a vestigial tail, just the coccyx, and I do not mean to insinuate anything extended or dangled from the body. This Homo sapient has a captivating story of how he came to be or how he wishes to view his past. He professes that between 5 and 8 million years ago, his ancestors branched off the evolutionary path along which he had trudged with the chimpanzees. As he may posit, the creature had timidly come down the leafy environs, possibly the dark jungles of Eastern Africa, and taken shelter in caves. He later emerged from the caves with fire and less bodily fur, perhaps envisioning to erect mud and grass-thatched habitation. By then standing on 2 of his 4 limbs, he in due course wandered off beyond Africa. Translocation over millennia brought this naked ape to bungalows and skyscrapers. Today's sophisticated man drives on dust-free highways in modern cars fixed with headlamps and propelled by droning motors, mostly powered by that greasy black gold oil. And evidently, moles of materialism litter the earth alongside dingy, dusty shacks in which misery sighs and gazes in silence. That this super ape had once been wholly engrossed in hunting are footprints that feature mostly in his imagination. Nowadays, he sails across the sky in Boeing or Airbus, adorned in business suits and carrying briefcases. He also sports a mobile phone. This oversized ape has been to the moon, and his eyes light up with strange adoration when he gazes into the starry nights. Yet, when he turns to consider his inner space, the interiority which, along with his physical form, accords him human experience, his eyes grow dim and his voice falters in incoherent babble. The creature is charmed by the evolutionary explanation of his large brain or cranial capacity, around which he spins elaborate notions about his state. He claims that environmental pressures were the drive behind the evolution of his rather large brain, which then set him on a path of development distinguished from that of other creatures. However, man's cranial capacity and his freed hands, which supposedly were 4 limbs, can no longer extend or stretch the frontiers of his discernment. Anthropology or studies of the sort suggest that the females of this overgrown ape have always been more intelligent than the males. Today, the species is engaged in lifting the female gender from deprived circumstances. And latterly, some females gleefully proclaim how boy dinosaurs had their butts kicked by females of that prehistoric type. Others among the females of the human species are inclined to put on just a little clothing, and the crude, carnal-minded males are culpable of ogling the more emotionally refined sex. The females, with no less salacious tongues than the males, are apt to boast of strange abilities. For instance, that when they make a brief call to the restroom, they could as well ease themselves in a manner very much like the males do, that is, while standing up. Moreover, doing it with a fair amount of accuracy, save for not being endowed with the member to shake. With hindsight, it appears that when man came down the trees and emerged from the caves, he had let out a battle cry that reverberated through the woods and over the hills, and perhaps echoing unto the heavens, that the goal of life was the survival of his DNA. Clones of himself reportedly walk upon this earth, and this super ape engages in congratulatory chain stamping as though he's made anything from zilch, as though he's made something from nothing. The primate also toys with the notion of taming his aging process in order to remain eternally young, and concocts strange potions to induce his happiness. If our ancestors held superficial ideas about themselves and their environs, and were thereby inclined to superstition, modern man, on his part, engages in make-believe. He is no less a hostage to delusions, including modifying his body parts to look like the demigods in motion pictures, musicals, and glossy magazines. Curiously still, he now and then denigrates himself vis-a-vis creatures lower than himself, speaking longingly of such creatures' apparent superior social behavior. Man's mind plays games with him in much the same way that he manipulates it to various devices. He has almost involuntarily morphed into the mass man. The mass man who is programmed now and then with set patterns of perception and reason. Man's inclinations are molded by the seemingly inevitable cultural turns, ebb and flow. Well, that roughly is how far we've come as a species. It reflects the amusing or even pitiful contradictions and fragile underpinnings of modern man's notions of culture or civilization. It appears, doesn't it, that the process of man's evolution became unstuck. While man seemed to develop more and more, he had in fact morphed into infant terrible. He is pretty controlling, and as we all know, man tends to issue veiled threats that he could blow the species off the face of the earth in mutually assured destruction. One cannot help but think deeply about this self-styled pinnacle of evolution. It is worthwhile to peek into the heart of this primate, man as it were, and help him possibly gain a grip on himself. As evident from the clip we've viewed, there is a breeze of exceptional achievement that surrounds modern man. One gets the impression that modern man considers himself, well, quite different from the generations that have gone by. Yes, in several respects, modern man is unique. After all, we dwell in the era of technological civilization, including the digital spectacle, which is a far cry from our forefathers' wildest imagination. Yet, the ancients and the modern share this awful flaw. man's feeble control over himself. An ancient riddle puzzles modern man, just like it did with our ancestors. Why can't we behave as sensibly as we possibly know we should? Where do the destructive passions in man spring up? What eats away at the very seams of our existence, leaving us with the experience of ennui, a peculiar restlessness or anxiety with a tinge of emptiness? Those who read the Bible could be familiar with Apostle Paul's frustration. He noted that, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. Walt Whitman, a writer, underlined the dilemma this way: I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Another writer who has succinctly portrayed man's inner contradictions in the modern era is Somerset Maugham. He observed, there are times when I look at the various parts of my character with perplexity. I recognize that I am made up of several persons and that the person that at the moment has the upper hand will inevitably give place to another. But which is the real one? All of them or none? Now, launching from those self-same concerns, Dr. Thomas Harris, whom we referred to in the initial episode, in his well-received book, I Am Okay, You Are Okay, explored why each one of us experiences himself as several warring factions, more or less helplessly. That book was initially published in 1968. Dr. Harris, a medical doctor, elaborated a distinct vocabulary and tool of transactional analysis, as he called it, namely that there exist in all of us three phenomenological realities. Phenomenological realities. He explained that in each person, there is the same little person he was when he was 3 years old. There is also his parents. The adult, though fragile and tentative in the early years of childhood, with maturation gets to edit parent and child data effectively, sorting out truth from chaff. Dr. Harris corroborated his notions regarding transactional analysis with earlier research done by Dr. Wilder Penfield. That earlier research indicated that when a weak electric current was applied to a section of the cerebral cortex in the brain, particular reflections reflective of the phenomenological realities that Dr. Harris postulated were evoked from the patient's memory in a manner akin to what day-to-day experiences induced. Here are my criticisms of what Dr. Harris postulated. The first and obvious criticism of his submission is this: the vast terrain of man's experiences and imagination transcend and defy reductive constructs or formulations such as the phenomenological realities proffered by Dr. Harris. What's more, his submission, proceeding from glimpses of personal experiences via the workings of the brain, does not compellingly indicate how an individual may ordinarily, or as a matter of routine, engage the brain to engender desired behavior or attitudinal change. It is also clear that the approach undertaken by Dr. Harris pandered to the largely unspoken but regular view at the time that a person's mental or psychological state sprang from the workings of the brain, which implied that understanding how the brain functioned would shed light on how to manage one's inner aspects. Now, in apparent linkage to that prior view, notable voices today consider brain activity and mental processes almost interchangeably. We shall highlight some of those voices toward the close of this episode. The aforementioned mentality, that is, conflating brain activity and mental processes notwithstanding, the focus in this series is neither the psychological issues associated with degenerative brain diseases such as Alzheimer's, nor the psychological challenges that arise from neurological conditions like epilepsy, traumatic brain injuries, or even cerebral malaria, which may require medication or surgical treatment. Rather, this series casts light on persons who are medically healthy but won't live as sensibly as they want to. We are talking of persons with arguably sound brains, but whose manner of conduct or sense of accountability towards fellow human beings falls short. Undeniably, a person does not need to grasp the operation of neurons or brain cells to enjoy psychological or mental well-being. Neither does one require knowledge of the brain's overall function for them to be kind and understanding or compassionate. Throughout history, individual men and women have been level-headed, warm and compassionate without any knowledge of the anatomy or workings of the brain. As such, it is doubtful that conflating mental function with brain activity can offer a definitive answer to man's feeble control over himself. The observations I have shared above, as well as the criticisms, highlight the difficulty of isolating the issue at hand in its proper context. The issue at hand is as to weigh the challenge of how man can overcome feeble control over himself. Because we cannot properly isolate that matter in its proper context, we also fail to develop pertinent trains of thought towards resolving the matter.